Hi everybody, and welcome to another class, English with Richard. Today we're going to be looking at the third conditional. The third conditional. Before we begin, remember this class is if you're a member of the channel, you can actually attend the conference, attend the class. So to join my channel, just click on the link in the chat, and there's another link in the chat. Once you remember, you can click on that and you can actually join the Zoom conference and participate in the class. Before we begin, let's see who we have in the conference. Right now I have one person in the conference, Clementi. Clementi, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
I'm fine, and you?
Fine. Are you ready for the class?
Yes, sir.
Good. So let's just see what we got in the chat. We've got in the chat only one person, Sergio, I think. Oh, hold on, because there should be more people in that chat. Yeah, I got some more people. Sorry. Domeka, Cesar. Cesar, you are a member of the channel. Hi, Cesar. That means that you can actually participate in the class, Cesar. You need to go to the community tab. I'm going to post the community tab right now in the chat. So anybody who's a member of the channel, and right now I see that Cesar Medina is in the chat, can go to this link that I just posted. And on that community tab, you will find another link which will allow you to actually join the Zoom meeting. Antonio says, put the link for Zoom, please. I can't put the link for Zoom here because everybody will see it, and then there'll be a lot of people in there and it'll be unmanageable. Only members can see the link. Only members can see the link. If you wish to participate, you need to actually join the channel. But if not, just stay in the chat, and I also answer questions in the chat. I deal with the members first in the conference, but I also, people in the chat who are not members can still participate in the class using the chat. So let's begin the class. Let me share the screen. The subject today is a little bit complicated. Remember, this is B1 level, intermediate, and actually we're coming to the end of the B1 level, the end of the B1 level. So nearly going to B2, which is upper intermediate. Let's have a look. Let me share the screen. Can't see it, this one here. So the subject of today's class, the third conditional. The third conditional. But before we begin looking at the third conditional, I think I'd better talk about conditionals in general and actually remind you of the other three conditionals. So actually, well, there are four conditionals. There are three conditionals plus mixed conditionals. Today, we will be looking at the third conditional. But we've already looked previously at the zero conditional, the first conditional, and the second conditional. Today, we will be looking at the third conditional. So before we begin, what is a conditional? What was the zero conditional that we saw in class previously? And what was the first conditional? And what was the second conditional? So this first screen is actually, let me just stop this a minute because I've got a green line on it. I need to reshare it. This first screen is from the previous class. So I've got three examples here. Actually, I've got some Spanish on here. I should remove that because we're not supposed to have any Spanish here in this class. This is actually from level A2, this screen. So this is a photo of water being heated in a kettle. If you heat water in a kettle, it boils. This is the zero conditional. This is Mo Farah. his fastest time in the 1,000 meters, 10,000 meters is 25 minutes and 46 seconds. If he runs 10,000 meters 31 seconds faster, he will break the world record. This is an example of this first conditional. And this is me running a race. This is me, my fastest 10K is 41:30. If I ran 10K 15 minutes faster, I would break the world record. So zero conditional, first conditional, second conditional. These three conditionals we saw before. So I don't know if anybody remembers them from a previous class, but let's just remind you of the rules. The zero conditional, this conditional is used when the result will always happen. So the first thing in all of these conditionals have two parts. We have a main clause, which begins with if, and we have a result clause. So what we mean by that, there are actually two verbs in there. In this one, the verb is heat. And in this one, the verb is boils. Let's put that in bold. So we have two clauses. One clause is the main clause. The main clause begins with if and shows us this imaginary situation. If you heat water, it boils. So the zero conditional, a conditional that we saw before, is used for facts, things that always happen, things that always happen. And we saw here that the two verbs are in the if clause, it's if plus present tense, and in the result clause, it's also present tense. Both the verbs in this conditional are in the present tense, and it's for things that always happen, things that always happen. Hi, Israel. Hi.
Hi, teacher. Hi,
How are
teacher.
you? How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
I'm fine, thanks. And you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. So today we're looking at the third conditional, and before I begin with the third conditional, I'm just reviewing very quickly, very briefly, the other conditionals. So that's a zero conditional dealt with in a previous class in level A2. And if you look on in my channel, you will find a video that dealt with this subject. The first conditional is used when the result is a real possibility now or in the future. So again, if it rains tomorrow, we'll go to the cinema. So here we have the if part, the main clause, the if part, and here we have the result. But this time, the result is in the future simple. The result is in the future simple with will. So the structure of this one was in the if part, it's if plus present tense again, the same as the previous one. But the result clause, the verb is in the future simple. Or it's in the future. Actually, we can use other future tenses. We could use going to. If it rains tomorrow, we're going to the cinema. But I don't want to go too deeply into these ones. We've already seen these ones. So the first conditional is used for situations now or in the future where there is a real possibility. So if you go back to the previous page, the previous screen, if Mo Farah runs 10,000 meters 31 seconds faster, he will break the world record. This is a real possibility. So we are using the first conditional. And then we've also seen before the second conditional. Now the second conditional is used when the situation is hypothetical or unreal, imaginary. It's an unreal situation. So to talk about this, we need to use if plus the verb in the past tense. Here, the verb is in the past. In this one here, it was in the present. And in the result clause, we don't use will, we use would. Would travel. I would travel around the world. This is the result of the hypothetical situation. So here, the if part is in the past simple, and the result is using would plus verb, plus the main verb. So these two here, the zero, the first, the second, we've seen them before, or I've talked about these, or I've had videos, I've got videos on my channel where these were dealt with before. So today we're going to look at the new one. So the first two here, this one and this one, are real possibilities, and this one is completely imaginary, like in my previous example where I said, if I ran 10K 15 minutes faster, I would break the world record. This is an impossibility. So this is a totally imaginary situation. It's completely imaginary. The second conditional is for things now or in the future, and it's imaginary. But when we, in the if part, we are using the past tense of the verb. In English, when we want to show that something is unreal or imaginary, we need to use the past form of the verb, because we don't have a special verb in English to show that we are talking about an imaginary situation. We need to use the past. So finally, we can get to the subject of today's class, because everything here was just a review. The third conditional, this is the subject of today's class, and this conditional is used to describe a situation that didn't happen and to imagine the result of this situation. That means that this conditional is used to talk about imaginary situations in the past, or things in the past which were the opposite of reality. Here's an example. If, this is the if part, obviously, if I had gone to bed early, I would have caught the train. So this is quite complicated. A lot of people have problems with this, because this is not, sorry, I did the wrong one there. The text should be black. A lot of people have problems with this. So basically the structure here is much more complicated. The if part applies to the past, but we cannot use the past tense here because we are using the past tense in the second conditional. So what we need to use in the if part is the past perfect. That is the verb, a tense that we saw before in another class, if plus past perfect. Now the past perfect is formed with had plus the past participle of the main verb. So in this case, the main verb is go, and the past participle of go is gone. So we say, if I had gone to bed early, and this here can actually be contracted. And we'd say, if I'd gone to bed early, I would have caught. So the result part also is quite complicated, because we need to use would plus have plus past participle. So quite a complicated structure. What we're saying here is that if I had gone to bed early, the if part is talking about an imaginary situation in the past. So it's always the opposite to reality. The reality is that I didn't go to bed early. But if I had gone to bed early, I would have caught the train. Maybe I should say here earlier. Earlier, yeah. I would have caught the train. Incidentally, we could also contract this to the de too. So then it would be, if I'd gone to bed earlier, I would have caught the train. This is how somebody would actually pronounce it. If I'd gone to bed earlier, I would have caught the train. So here we have this de is had, and this de is would. Okay, let's continue. I don't know. So here I have written down the structure again. Like all conditionals, there are two clauses. Like all conditionals, there are two clauses. The if clause, so it's if plus past perfect. Here I've got another example. I've got a lot more examples here. So, but let's copy that one up there so we can see that if clause again. Let's copy that there. If she had studied, sorry, I didn't want to put it there actually. I wanted to put it here. The if clause, example, if plus past perfect, if she had studied, if she had studied. So it's had plus the past participle of study, which is a regular verb. Now, as I said earlier, normally people would contract this. Native speakers would say, if she'd studied, if she'd studied. So when it's with the contraction, you may not hear the had, because in the second conditional would be if she studied. So it's very similar when you actually listen. This one is third conditional. If she'd studied, this is very, this is reduced. If she'd studied, and this one is if she studied. So you need to, it's very difficult to actually listen to the difference, which is why maybe some people have a problem picking this up. This is what it would be like in the third conditional. If she'd studied, and this one in the second conditional, if she studied. With the other verbs, the example that we saw earlier, it's easier to hear because go is an irregular past. And in the past, it would be if she went, because we use in the past. But with regular verbs, it's more difficult to hear. So to form the third conditional, we need to use in the if plus past perfect. And in the result, we need to use would plus have plus past participle. So here's the example here. She would have passed the exam. She would have passed the exam. So again, this in the real world would be said she'd have passed the exam. She'd have passed the exam. Even this is actually reduced to of. She'd have passed the exam. If she'd studied, she'd have passed the exam. I don't know why I've got that written there twice. Let's remove that. If she'd studied, she'd have passed the exam. So that's the example here. An example of the third conditional, an imaginary situation in the past with a result in the past. Both parts of this talk about the past. If she'd studied, she would have passed the exam. If she'd studied, she would have passed the exam. But really, we know she didn't study, so she didn't pass. The reality of the situation is that she didn't study and she didn't pass. She didn't study, so she didn't pass. This is the reality. But here we're talking about a hypothetical situation, an imaginary situation in the past. So we need to use this structure, the third conditional. If she'd studied, she would have passed the exam. Again, using the contractions. So I've got some other examples here, and then maybe we can practice the pronunciation with the people in the class. If you've got any questions, Clementi or Israel? Do you have any questions?
It's a little complicated.
Yeah, this is this is advanced. This is more advanced. I mean, basically, Israel. I've covered all of the beginner level and intermediate, lower intermediate subjects. So now it's getting up to a higher level.
Yeah.
And this, yeah, is quite complicated structure.
Yes.
I don't really want to use Spanish in the class, but I think in Spanish es como si hubiera estudiado, ni puedo decirlo en español, si hubiera estudiado, hubiera pasado, I think, or no.
Sí, that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that in Spanish, you have this special verb form to talk about these situations, but in English, we don't have a special verb form. So we need to, so here, instead of using the special verb form, we're using the past perfect here, and this structure here, had plus have plus past participle. So let's look at the other examples, and then maybe at least we can practice the pronunciation. If I hadn't eaten so much, here we have a negative. If I hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt sick. The reality is the opposite. I did eat a lot, so I did feel sick. If I hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt sick. If we had taken a taxi, we wouldn't have missed the plane. Again, here I would contract this. Here I'm using the negative contraction. So if we'd taken a taxi, we wouldn't have missed the plane. She wouldn't have been tired if she'd gone to bed early. So notice with these ones that it's in reverse. And down here, I've got here, we can reverse the order of the clauses. That means the if part doesn't need to come at the beginning. If here we have the word, up until now, I've put the if at the beginning with a comma at the end. And then I've put the result after. But we can, it doesn't matter. We can say it like that. If I hadn't drunk that coffee last night, I would have slept better. Or we can change it and say, I would have slept better if I drunk that coffee last night. It can be, the result can come first. It doesn't make any difference. Here, there's no comma. So when you use contractions plus have plus past participle, native speakers nearly always use the contraction. Both the contractions. Let's look at the other examples and then we practice the pronunciation. She would have become a teacher if she'd gone to university. She would have become a teacher if she'd gone to university. Let's have a look at the next one. She'd have become a teacher if she'd gone to university. We just did that one. He would have been on time for the interview if he'd left the house at 9. Again, we're going to contract that there. He'd have been on time for the interview if he'd left the house at 9. So before we continue, let's practice the pronunciation. So let's begin with this one. Clementi. If she'd studied, she'd have passed the exam. Are you still there, Clementi?
If she'd studied, she'd have passed the exam.
Yeah, good. She'd have passed the exam. Now, when normally this is like contracted to like, it sounds more like an oof, yeah. This little have here, let's put it up there, so I don't want to put it in there. The pronunciation of the have is more like an oof, so let's put it down here actually. Would have. I can't, no, because yeah, we're using the contraction. So I'd of, you can't write it like this. No se puede escribir, pero es más, estamos usando, sorry, I shouldn't be speaking in Spanish. You can't write it like that, but I'm using a double contraction. Listen again. If she'd studied, she'd have passed the exam. She'd have passed. Repeat, Clementi.
She'd have passed.
She'd have. It's more like
She'd have.
it's like the wood. Oof, yeah. It's like this. Try and write it phonetically. She'd, something like that. She'd have. I think that's the best way of doing it. She'd have.
She'd have.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. If she'd studied, she'd have passed the exam.
She'd studied. She'd have passed the exam.
Very good. What about you, Israel? If she'd studied, she'd have passed the exam.
If she studied, she'd have passed the exam.
Very good. If I hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt sick. Clementi.
If hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt sick.
Good. Yeah. If I hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt sick, Israel.
If I hadn't eaten so much, I wouldn't have felt sick.
Good. Next one. If we'd taken a taxi, we wouldn't have missed the plane. Clementi.
If we'd taken a taxi, we wouldn't have missed the plane.
Good. And Israel?
If we'd taken a taxi, we wouldn't have missed the plane.
Good. She wouldn't have been tired if she'd gone to bed earlier. She wouldn't have been tired if she'd gone to bed earlier. Clementi.
She wouldn't have been tired if she'd gone to bed earlier.
Good. She'd have become a teacher if she'd gone to university.
She would have become a teacher if she had gone to the university.
Yeah, very good, but you didn't use the contractions, yeah? She would have, no, I'm not using the contraction now, sorry. She'd have become a teacher, maybe it was me. She'd have become a teacher if she'd gone to university. Repeat.
She'd have become a teacher if she'd gone to university.
Yeah, remember, it's more like she'd have become.
She'd have.
Yeah, she'd have become a teacher if she'd gone to university.
She'd have become a teacher if she'd gone to university.
Very good. He'd have been on time for the interview if he'd left the house at 9.
He would have been on time for the interview if he had left the house.
Yeah, very good, but you're not using the contractions. Okay, I mean, you don't have to use the contractions, but if you want to sound more like a native, then you should use the contractions. So very good. Let's continue. Thanks to both of you. Let's continue. What else we got? I've got some more examples here. I don't think I'll repeat these, and some of them I'll get you to repeat. So if I'd seen Lucia, I would have told her. If I'd seen Lucia, I would have told her. I'll repeat. I'll do them first, and we'll do some of them. If I'd seen Lucia, I would have told her. If Anna had been free, and here I can contract this too. If Anna had been free yesterday, I would have invited her. If Anna had been free yesterday, I would have invited her. If they hadn't passed their exam, if they hadn't passed their exam, their teacher would have been sad. If it had rained yesterday, we would have stayed at home. If it had rained yesterday. Oh, sorry, this is a question. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't comment on this here. I'm making a question. If it had rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home? So notice with the question here, in the result part, we're reversing the order. It's would plus subject plus have instead of subject plus would plus have. If it had rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home? And if it had rained yesterday, what would you have done? Another question, sorry, with two contractions. If it had rained yesterday, what would you have done? Here we can contract this. So let's practice. I think we'll just practice the pronunciation of these two questions. If it had rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home? Clementi, repeat. If it had rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home?
If it rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home?
Yeah, this is difficult. This if it had rained.
It
Would, but you got to put it together. It's like this. Look. If it would.
If it would.
Yeah, but it's not stressed. So it's like if it had, it's actually reduced. So if it had rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home? Repeat.
If it would rain yesterday,
would you have stayed at home?
Would you have stayed at home?
Good, but you need to reduce this. It's not stronger, it's weaker. Yeah, so it's if it had rained, it's very short sound. If it had rained yesterday, Israel.
If it had rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home?
Very good, yeah. Let's try the other one. If it had rained yesterday, what would you have done?
If it had rained yesterday, what would you have done?
What would you have done? The have is pronounced like an of. What would you have done? Repeat. Clementi, or if it had rained yesterday, what would you have done?
If it rained yesterday, what would you've done?
Yeah, I didn't actually hear the. I mean, if it's really difficult for people to say this, okay, just say had, yeah, because it's quite difficult to pronounce that. It's okay. If it had rained yesterday, what would you have done? Repeat.
If it had rained yesterday, what would you done?
Yeah, so it's easier for you to say that, and you can say that, it's okay, but you're never really going to sound like a native if you don't use the contractions. People will understand you. It depends. I don't think sometimes that is realistic for somebody to try and sound like a native. Most people have an accent. I mean, my accent in Spanish is very poor. People have commented on that, but at the end of the day, if people understand you, that for me, that is the important thing, that people understand you. Other people have a different priority and they really want to speak a foreign language, English or Spanish, like a native. That is quite a difficult thing to actually achieve at the end of the day. I think for me, the important thing is that people understand you. Not that you have perfect pronunciation like a native. But if you do want to sound like a native, then you need to use the contractions. Let's carry on. Some more examples that I'm going to read. I wouldn't have left my job if I'd known how difficult it is to find another one. I'm using the contractions again here. I wouldn't have left my job if I'd known how difficult it is to find another one. I would have taken a photo if I'd brought my camera with me. I would have taken a photo if I'd brought my camera with me. He would have died if the ambulance hadn't arrived quickly. He would have died if the ambulance hadn't arrived quickly. She would have gone to your birthday party if she hadn't been sick. She would have gone to your birthday party if she hadn't been sick. He wouldn't have become lost if he'd taken a map with him. He wouldn't have become lost if he'd taken a map with him. The team would have won if the referee hadn't taken the bribe. The team would have won if the referee hadn't taken the bribe. And finally, you wouldn't have needed fillings if you had, or if you'd, I recontract that, if you'd brushed your teeth more frequently. You wouldn't have needed fillings if you'd brushed your teeth more frequently. So, very complicated, Israel. Do you think? This subject?
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's going to get more complicated because finally we have another type of conditional, which is the mixed conditionals. Mixed conditionals is when we have, there are two types. The first type is when we have a hypothetical situation in the past with a result in the present. So in this case, we need to actually combine. If we go back here, we have a hypothetical situation in the past. We need to use this structure in the past from the third conditional, and we need to use this structure for the result because the result is in the present. So we're mixing this one with this one. We have a hypothetical situation here with a result now. Here I have some examples. If I had won the lottery, I would be rich. So this is an imaginary situation in the past with a result now. If I had won the lottery in the past, I would be rich now. So here I'm using, I can use the contraction here too. If I'd won the lottery, I would be rich. That means if I'd won the lottery in the past, because this is with had plus a past participle, and here I'm just using would plus verb. I'm not using would plus have plus been. But I didn't win the lottery in the past, and I am not rich now. That's the reality. If I had taken French in high school, past situation when I was in high school many years ago, I would have more job opportunities now. So again, this part has the had plus the past participle because it's talking about an imaginary situation in the past. But here it says would plus have, not would plus have plus had. Would have had. That's for the past. It's just would plus have. The real situation, I didn't take French in high school and I don't have many job opportunities now. And the last example, if she had been born in the United States, she wouldn't need a visa to work here. So what that means underneath, she wasn't born in the United States, but she does need a visa to, and now she does need a visa to work here. And we can take that out actually, just say she needs a visa. So this is an imaginary situation or a hypothetical situation in the past using had plus past participle and with a result now using would plus base verb. And the other type of mixed conditional is the reverse. This is less common, this type. These ones are a hypothetical, unreal situation now with a result in the past, which is strange, but it is possible. For example, if I were rich, This is with the past, so this means now. If I were rich now, I would have bought that Ferrari we saw yesterday. So if I were rich now, I would have bought that Ferrari we saw yesterday. This is with the past. So this type is not very common. It's actually quite difficult to come up with examples of a hypothetical situation now with a result in the past. The first ones are more common, but it is possible. If Sam spoke Russian, he would have translated the letter for you. If Sam spoke Russian now, he would have translated the letter for you yesterday. So not so common. Really here, this is like generally. If Sam spoke Russian generally, he would have translated the letter for you. What other more examples of these? Not very common, these ones. Here underneath I got an explanation. Sam doesn't speak Russian, and that's why he didn't translate the letter. And the last example, hypothetical situation. Now, if I didn't have too much work, if I didn't have to work so much, unreal situation now, or hypothetical situation now, I would have gone to the party last night. Imaginary situation in the past. But I have to work a lot, and that is why I didn't go to the party last night. Good, so that covers all of this subject, quite a complicated subject. The third conditional used to talk about imaginary situations in the past with a result in the past, and also mixed conditionals where you have an imaginary situation in the past with a result now, or the opposite, an imaginary situation now with a result in the past. So let's continue then with questions. Questions for Clementi and Israel and anybody else in the chat. We've got Sebastian in the chat, Angie, Freddie, Antonio. What we need to do here is identify the conditional. 0, first, second, third, or mixed. I don't know if I have any mixed here actually. So we need to identify which conditional it is. So the first one is then, if I drink tea in the morning, it makes me feel sick. Which conditional is this one? Look at the two verbs. The verb here is drink, and the verb here is makes. What conditional is this, Clementi?
Past simple.
Is it the 0 conditional? Remember the conditionals here, look. 0 conditional. Present simple, used for things that are always true. First conditional, present simple, future simple, used for things that real possibilities now or in the future. Second conditional, past simple and would plus verb, used for imaginary situations now or in the future. And finally, the third conditional, used for imaginary situation in the past with the past perfect here, and would plus have plus caught here. So what two tenses is this? Drink and makes.
The second condition?
No. What about you, Israel? This is present simple, present simple. Anybody in the chat got the answer? This is difficult. Has anybody in the chat got the answer?
The 0 conditional?
The 0 conditional, very good. It's the 0 conditional because it's I'm just checking the chat here. Present simple is a fact. It's always true. So let's put here. Present simple, present. Well, I'll just put there the 0 conditional, I think, because otherwise 0 conditional. I just put 0, I think it's easier. 0. This is the 0. If I'll tell her if she comes. Here we got will plus verb, and here we got present simple. I'll tell her if she comes. What conditional is this? First, second, third, or mixed?
Second conditional.
No. It's not the second conditional. Nelson says it's the first conditional. Very good. It's the first conditional because it's will in the result and present simple in the will in the result and present simple in the if part, in the main clause. I'd have helped had I been there. I think I did this one. This is too complicated. So if I had been there. I'd have helped if I'd been there. Which one is this?
If past perfect.
Yeah, so which conditional is it, Israel?
The third.
Very good. Yeah, it's the third conditional. Good. The third conditional. If he's there, could you tell him that I really need to speak to him? Well, this is actually, I didn't mention earlier, but in the second conditional and all of them, actually, we can use could instead of would. So here the could is replacing the would. If he's there, could you tell him that I really need to speak to him? Present simple here, could, which is like would, plus verb. Which one is this one? Anybody? 0, first, second, or third? Has anybody got in the chat? Will plus present. I mean, Antonio, but what one? You need to put the numbers. If you're in the chat, you need to put the numbers because otherwise, the question numbers. I don't know which one you're referring to because there's a delay on the chat. Any ideas? Anybody?
The first continues. The first.
The first. If which one? If he's there, could you tell him no? Because actually, I'm confused about this one now. I think, yeah, if he's there, could you tell him? Yeah, actually, sorry, it is the first. Sorry, yeah, it is the first. Sorry. So actually, I said the could was like the would, but this is, I didn't cover this subject actually, so it's a little bit confusing. But actually, this is the first conditional because this bit is in the present. So it's like a real, if he is there, could you tell him? Maybe I should change this. It's a bad example actually, and put will you tell him? Because doing it like that makes it a polite request. But I can use will there, and then it's more like what we dealt with. If I were you, I'd buy it as soon as possible. That one was the first. If I were you, incidentally, with these conditionals, we don't use.
Second.
Yeah. When we have it's the second conditional. Very good. Yeah. But another thing I want to mention is that in these conditionals with the first person with I, we normally say if I were instead of saying if I was. Normally it's I was, but in the conditionals, it's better to say if I were. If I had the time, I'd help you. If I had the time, I would help you. Which one is this? The verb in the if is in the past, and here's with would.
Second.
Very good, yeah. Second. Good. I would have handled things differently if I had been in charge. I would have handled if I had been in charge. Which one is this? Any ideas? The third. Very good. Yeah. In the past. Water boils if you heat it to 100 degrees Celsius. Water boils if you heat it. Boils, heat.
The zero conditional.
The zero conditional. Very good. Israel. If she tried harder, she might have succeeded. Here, the might replaces the would. Might just means that is less possibility.
The second conditional.
If she tried, no. If she had tried harder, she would, or here it's might have succeeded.
Third conditional?
The third conditional in the past. Yeah, good. The third conditional. If you work hard enough, you may well pass. This again, this may here is actually replacing the will that we saw. You can use may if there's less possibility. In the second conditional, we can use might, or in the third or the second conditional, we can use might. In this one, we can use may. She may have succeeded. You could use may or might in either of them, actually. Yeah, because may and might, they're more or less synonymous. I think may is just a little bit more formal. If you work, yeah, if you work hard, yeah, it's the first conditional. If we fail, who will be held responsible? Question. If we fail, who will be held responsible? Question 11. If you're in the chat, you need to put the question number.
The first.
If we fail, yeah, the first conditional, very good. If you're answering in the chat, you need to put the question number because there's like a delay in the chat. So I don't know actually what question you're on. If she went, she could report back to us all. If she went, she could report back to us all. So this is in the past, and this one is like would. Question 12. Any ideas, Israel, Clementi?
Third conditional?
Third, no. It's actually the second. Claudia says the second. I think she's applied to this one, but I'm not absolutely sure because she didn't put the number. It's actually the second. If he'd studied at a good college, he might have got a better grade. If he'd studied at a good college, he might have got a better grade.
The second conditional.
No, if he had studied, he might have got. Yeah, here the might is instead of the would again. Yes, that's just the third conditional in the past. If you ever need help, just ask me. Present, present.
Zero conditional.
Zero, very good, yeah. I'd be surprised if it rained. Would plus past. I'd be surprised if it rained.
The third conditional.
The third condition. No, no, it's the second conditional. It's like now, yeah, because it's would plus be plus it rained. So the third conditional would be I would have been. Let me just write the third conditional here so you can see the difference. I would have been surprised if it had rained. This is the third conditional with would plus have plus past participle. And here it's I'd be, and it's I would have been. And here it's if it rained, past simple. If it had rained, past perfect. Finally, If anyone complains, we deal with it immediately. If anyone complains, we deal with it immediately.
Zero conditional?
Yeah, very good. Present, zero conditional. Good, so got better towards the end. Some more questions, more difficult questions. Just to finish the class. I wasn't thirsty, I didn't drink the lemonade. This is the real situation. The real situation is I wasn't thirsty, so I didn't drink the lemonade. If I had been thirsty, I would have drunk the lemonade. So this is a real situation, and we need to put it into a conditional. I wasn't thirsty, so I didn't drink the lemonade. If I had been thirsty, I would have drunk the lemonade. I didn't know Kirsty was in town. I didn't call her. So if, who can write this as a conditional? If, so you've got to put this first bit, I didn't know, you've got to put that in the correct tense. I didn't know. Anybody? What about in the chat? Has anybody got in the chat got the answer? Anybody? I can't see anybody in the chat. Only Michael says hi. Have I got all the chat messages there? Sometimes they don't get all the chat messages up. Difícil, yeah, very difícil, very difficult, very difficult. Can anybody tell me the answer to this? You need to write if. So what do we need to use here? Here we need to use the past perfect. And it's this is a negative. The real situation is a negative. So that means the imaginary situation is a positive because it's always the opposite. Can anyone give me the answer? Anyone in the chat? There's 27 people in the chat. If I knew, no, that is the second conditional, Martin. You need to put it in the third conditional. The third conditional is formed with had plus the past participle. So what do we say? If I, yeah, Brenda says hadn't known, but that's in the negative. The real situation is in the negative. I didn't know. If the real situation is in the negative, then the imaginary situation must be in the positive. So Brenda's answer is in the negative. I want the same answer in the positive. If, yeah, Martin says, if I had known Kirsty was in town, who's got the other part? What about Clementi? Do you have the other part? Israel, are you still there or are you sleeping?
No, I'm here.
Thinking.
I won't be call her? No.
I would. What do we need next? To form the third conditional. Do you remember the class? Anybody in the chat? Let's have a look. Where's the third conditional? If plus past perfect, that's what we did. And the other part is would plus have plus past participle. I think I'll copy this here so we can put it over there so people can remember the structure. Let's put it down here. This is what we need to use.
I would
So,
have called her.
very good. Yeah, I would have called her. Good. Next we have number 3. I didn't know watching this documentary was important for our exam, so I didn't watch it. This is the real situation. Starting with if didn't know, you got to put it with if plus past perfect. You got to put this verb here in the past perfect.
I had no watching.
If I had known, the past participle of know is known. If I had known watching, this documentary was important for our exam, comma, I would plus have past participle.
I
I would have.
watched it.
Very good. Watched it. I would have watched it. I would have watched it. Let's get rid of that a minute. Let's move this in a bit. Oh, I can't. It's just strange the view, so that's a bit better. Yeah. If I'd known that watching this documentary was important for exam, I would have watched it. I would have watched it. I walked home from the club. My friend was too drunk to drive.
If
If
I
my friend, I'll start off because it's quite difficult. If my friend, this time we've got it the other way around. Or maybe we could start it the other way, do it the same way it is there. Let's start with the would part. We got to do this part, which is the result. So we've got to,
I had
no, we're going to use this here for this verb, walked. And this is a positive. So here we need a negative. So we need would plus have plus past participle for this verb, but in the negative. Any ideas? What about in the chat? Has anybody got an idea about this in the chat?
I wouldn't have.
Very good. Yeah, I wouldn't have. And then we need the past participle of walk. Walk is a regular verb. I wouldn't have walked home from the club. This one is the other way around. The if part is last. If my friend now you need to put the verb was in the past perfect. If my friend,
be
yeah,
Me?
you need something else. If my friend, and also this is positive, so we need a negative. If my friend, anybody in the chat, if my friend had been almost from Fanny, but because this is a positive, here we need a negative. If my friend had been, the problem with the chat is there's a lot of delay in there. No, has been, no. Anybody wouldn't have walked if my friend had been too drunk. No, very tricky. I wouldn't have walked home from the club if my friend hadn't been drunk. I wouldn't have walked home from the club if my friend hadn't been, or we could put there too drunk to make it the same. Hadn't been too drunk. Number 5. I didn't go to the store. I thought it closed at 5 p.m. It closed at 6 p.m. I would go to the store. Who's got the answer? Israel. I didn't, the reality is I didn't go to the store. So I would, you need to use would plus have plus past participle here. I would. Fanny says would had gone. No. Claudia, would have gone. Very good, yeah. I would have gone to the store. I would have gone to the store if, we're very quiet, Clementi and Israel, very quiet. Are you still there? Are you thinking?
Yes.
I would have gone to the store. I think this is very difficult, this one, because we've got to use a different verb here. So I would have gone to the store if I had known that it closed at 6 p.m. I didn't know that it closed at 6 p.m. I thought it closed at 5 p.m. It was 5:30, so I didn't go. But if I would have gone to the store if I'd known that it closed at 6 p.m. These ones are difficult. I ate the yogurt because they're actually in reverse. You can do them both ways round. I ate the yogurt in the fridge. I thought it was mine, not yours. Let's start off with the first bit to help you. I wouldn't. Who's got the answer to this one? I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
Eat.
Well, you've got to use this structure. Would plus have plus past participle of eat. So Fanny in the chat has the correct answer. I wouldn't have eaten. Good. I wouldn't have eaten the yogurt in the fridge if, this is like the one, actually here I made a mistake. The one before this should have been if I had known. If I had known, so this is the same. If I had known that it was yours. I wouldn't have eaten that. I wouldn't have eaten the yogurt in the fridge if I'd known it was yours. Let's put these in yellow. Number 7. I'm really hungry now. I didn't have any breakfast. Anybody in the chat? Israel, Clementi.
I wouldn't have.
Well, it's I am, so this is actually a mixed conditional, Clementi. So the first part is now. It's very difficult. The first part is now. So is I wouldn't. I wouldn't. Has anybody got the answer in the chat? I wouldn't. This is mixed. I wouldn't. Let's see if anybody in the chat can get the answer. I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm going to have to give you the answer. This is now, so I'm going to use, this part is like the second conditional. So I wouldn't be hungry now. I don't need to put the now because, well, I can do. I wouldn't be hungry now if, yeah, Martin says if I had had breakfast. Yeah, if I had had breakfast. Some people don't like two hads, but the first had is an auxiliary and the second had is the main verb. And people don't normally say, if I had had. They normally just say, if I'd had. Very tricky, because this one here is a mixed conditional. The result is now, so it's would plus base verb with the main clause, the hypothetical imaginary situation in the past with had plus past participle. Finally, the last one of a very difficult class. I didn't see Tony at the party. I wanted to speak to him about his vacation in France. If I didn't see,
I would have seen.
No, if anybody in the chat, put this bit, this is the if part here, look. Didn't see, you've got to put this in this structure. If I would see, says Claudia, no. This is the if part. We don't use would in the if part. Anybody? Had seen, yeah. Brenda and Claudia. If I had seen Tony at the party, who's got the next bit to finish the class? Anybody? If I had seen Tony at the party,
I would have wanted.
I would have. Yeah, I wanted. So we're not going to. It's a bit more complicated because I wanted to speak to him, but I didn't. So if I had seen Tony at the party, as Fanny says and Claudia say in the chat, I would have spoken to him about his vacation in France. And with that, we have finished the class, a very complicated subject. And that's why this class actually has lasted for 1 hour, 15 minutes. This is, as I said at the beginning of the class, now we are arriving at the end of level B1, the end of intermediate level. I think maybe 2 or 3 more classes at this level. And then it's upper intermediate, which is pretty advanced. But all the other subjects, the easier subjects are in. I have a complete course now from beginning. Yeah. So that's it for today. Thanks very much, Israel, for attending the class, and Clementi. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Fanny, Martin, Claudia, Rossio, Brenda in the chat for answering the questions, Irma and Antonio. And see you next week with another class, level intermediate in English, B1. Goodbye. See you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.